Before Rendlesham, he did his duty in Korea, in Vietnam, and in Japan. And during this Veterans Day week, Colonel, I want to thank you for your service. The other thing you may not know about him is he has 2 books. The first one's called The Halt Perspective. The second is called The Halt Perspective. Halt Perspective 2. And I see he got one in his hand, and he can talk more about his book. And perhaps the third thing you don't know about the Colonel, you'll find out as he calls it as he sees it. So please welcome Colonel Charles Halt.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And in fact, the previous talk is one of the reasons I'm here. Let me explain this. I'm going to stop down here. Yeah, if you would. Yeah. Here's the book. I suggest you get it if you're really interested in the case. Let me explain why. I don't sell books. I'm not in the business of making money off books. This is written for serious researchers. It's factual. I can back up everything in it. It covers all the nonsense I've known up to this date. There's an awful lot out there. There's so many wannabes, so many pretenders. It's unbelievable. Do not believe 3/4 of what you hear or see about Rendlesham. In fact, I'm a little bit disappointed with what John said, because a lot of stuff he told you today is not true or it's inaccurate. And I'm going to go over it for you now. I hate to do that, but I can't leave things sit the way they are now. Take you back to 1980. I was assigned to RAF Bentwaters as a deputy base commander. It was a very fantastic job for me coming out of the Pentagon. I get almost a guaranteed promotion if I stayed out of trouble. In fact, Rendlesham almost derailed it. At the time, Bentwaters was the largest tactical fighter wing in the free world. To give you an idea of the size and scope, the base population was almost 14,000. We're talking a small American city in England. I'm not going to go into a lot of details on the mission of the base, but keep in mind 1980, peak of the Cold War. The Chinese were shelling the offshore islands of Matsu and Quemoy. The Russians had moved tanks and artillery and infantry divisions up to the Polish border because the Solidarity was going crazy. Germany was having real problems with the Red Army Brigade. In fact, they'd even kidnapped General Dozier. Maybe some of you older people will remember all that. There was a lot of tension. Both the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union, and the American government or the military had their fingers on the nuclear triggers. We exercised all the time. A lot of tension in the air.
Excuse me, Colonel. Colonel, could you tip the microphone toward your mouth this way?
Can you hear me a little better now?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not as sensitive as what I'm familiar with. I don't want to get any feedback. I'm going to start with 1980 December 26th morning, Boxing Day as they call it. Part of my job was to know what was going on in the base all the time. I stayed in the background. I was involved in everything I could get involved in. I rode with police patrols, I visited the fire department, midnight chow, finance, civil engineers were working on a building or repairing a road, I was there. While the base commander was out cutting ribbons, kissing babies, giving dignitary tours, I was making sure that all the fires were put out before they really got going. So it was a challenging job, and I really enjoyed it. On the morning of December 26th, I stopped at the police station to pick up the police blotters. The police blotters being the chronological listing of the previous 24-hour activity. When I walked into the police station, the desk sergeant, Sergeant McCabe, started to laugh. Now, he had a good sense of humor. I just figured he'd been working all night and he was just a little tipsy, you know what I mean, from the stress and the night work. I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "Colonel, you're not going to believe this. Peniston, Burroughs, and Cabanas were out in the woods last night chasing UFOs all night, and the lieutenant, who was the senior police officer on duty, said, 'Don't put anything in the blotter.' At first I thought he was kidding. I said, 'Are you serious?' He said, 'Yes.' I said, 'Wait a minute. What do you know?' He said, 'Well, somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from Sergeant Airman Burroughs east gate at Woodbridge. Now, we had 5 police patrols on duty all the time. 2 on Bentwaters, police 2, police 3, police 4 and 5 on Woodbridge. Police 1 was a supervisor, he floated back and forth. Police 4 was John Burrows on duty. Police 5 was Bud Steffens, who was on duty. Burrows was sent up to the back gate. It was on the checklist. Regularly checked the back gate because it was secure at night. We had issues because it had a combination lock, and the maintenance people would get the combination, and sometimes after hours they'd use the gate as a shortcut and not lock the gate back up again. So it was on the checklist. Burrows went up to the gate somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he looks outside as he checks the lock. He sees bright lights in the forest. He did not see something in the sky. He sees something that appears to be a downed aircraft, multicolored lights. So he hustles back to the guard shack, which is about 50 or 100 feet away. He calls up the desk sergeant and says, "Have you had any reports of downed aircraft or anything?" Well, immediately, Sergeant McCabe had some suspicion that maybe it was a practical joke because of the holidays, and he is hesitant to do anything. So Burrows calls his partner, Bud Steffens, who's driving his own car. He comes up to the gate with him, he gets in the guard shack, and they both say, "There's definitely something out there." So McCabe immediately calls their traffic control tower, Bentwaters and Woodbridge. They're manned, but they're not up and running, but the radars are on. Both say, "Nothing going on, all's quiet, we don't have anything." Well, he says, "I've got a report of something in the forest." So he calls Eastern Radar, who's responsible for air traffic, British air traffic control in the area. Nothing reported, nothing seen, nothing done. He calls Neatus Head, which is the air defense radar. Same thing, nothing reported, nothing done. He calls Heathrow. Heathrow says our long-range radar shows one thing, 2 flights coming in from the States, but they're out over the English Channel. There's nothing in your area. So obviously, nothing was flying. They hadn't heard anything. So what are we going to do? So they both bundle in one of the K cars. They drive down the East Gate Road to the Forest Service Road, which is perpendicular. They see some lights. There's definitely something out there. It appears to be structural. So they turn around and they come back to the base of the gate. Central Security Control, who controls the security folks on the base, sends Peniston, who's the Woodbridge supervisor, to the gate to check. Now, Peniston has Airman Cabanasack with him. Airman Cabanasack had only been on the base probably a week or less. He was very new to the base. Peniston was kind of showing him the ropes and the layout of the base. They all gather at the base of the gate, and they're very firmly convinced we got to do something. In the meantime, they call Sergeant Chandler, J.D. Chandler, Master Sergeant, who's the senior Master Sergeant on duty for the Surrey Police, and he's en route. In the meantime, Peniston takes it upon himself, and rightly so. We need to go out and see. There could be somebody out there, somebody injured, something, protect property, life, etc. So he checks his weapons as well as Burrows and Cabanasack. Now, he did not want to take Burrows with him for a very good reason. Burrows tended to get a little emotional and overexcited and get involved in things, and he kind of frightened people. Burrows volunteers to go, and Steffens refuses to go. So they bundle into the Jeep, 3 of them. They go down the Forest Service Road. You turn right on get on the East Gate Road, turn right on the Forest Service Road, go about 200 yards. I'm going to show you this on a map. They go into the forest. It's a very rough, rutted trail. They go down the Forest Service Road about 3/4 of the way and take a left in a little side trail. They didn't approach a fence. There is an old rusty barbed wire fence there. There was at the time. They get close to the object, and the radios are breaking up. They're having a lot of trouble with the radios. So they leave Cabanasack about halfway between the vehicle, the Jeep, and where they see something in the forest. They see something definitely structured. They go forward. Now what happens from here on? The story has changed about 15 or 20 different times through the years from both parties, and I'll explain part of why in a few minutes. Something happens, but they continually, when they do make contact with the gate, say, "We see it, Every time we approach it, it moves away. He said the same thing consistently for 13 years. So whether they actually got close to an object, close enough to touch it or not, nobody knows. Peniston now claims he had a notebook with him, which he did. We verified that. Burroughs says he never took the notebook out. He claims he did a lot of sketches and stuff on the site. We don't know for sure. There's a reason for some of that, too. They come back to the base. They get debriefed at the gate by everybody there. Meantime, J.D. Chandler, the supervisor's there. They say the same thing. We saw something. It was definitely structured. We saw the lights. Every time we got near it, it moved away. That's what they tell them when they come back to the gate. They go to Central Security Control. When all the police finish their shift, they go to Central Security Control where they get debriefed and they turn in their weapons because that's where the armory is. They get debriefed at the armory. Prior to getting on the Bluebird bus, which is nothing but a big blue school bus, to go back to Bentwaters. Again, he's asked, what did you guys see? Well, we saw a structured craft, but we couldn't get near it. Okay. Peniston gets on the bus. He sits next to Richard Bertolino. Richard Bertolino says, well, I heard all that chatter on the radio. What happened? He said, well, we saw this object. He said, what did it look like? Peniston takes out the notebook. There's nothing in the notebook. It's empty. He takes a pen and he draws a triangular craft. He said, here's what it looked like. I have statements from Aaron Bertolino. They go back to the base. They go home. Burroughs and Peniston live in Ipswich. They live off the base. We didn't have enough room in all the dormitories for everybody. So the senior people ended up getting to live off the base. Peniston goes home. He knows there's going to be some questions. He talks to a neighbor who's a plasterer. He gets about 4 or 5 pounds of plaster of Paris and a bucket of water. And he goes back to the base. The 3 indentations where the craft had been sitting. He makes plaster casts of all 3 indentations. I have one of those indentations. I'll show you a picture of it. So here we are, the first night. That pretty much tallies up the first night. The following morning, British police show up. They do. I have their documents from the police department. And they take a look at things and say, oh, they poo-poo it. There's no UFO. We did get a call, but there was a break-in at one of the post offices at Bromley, so it was more important than coming out to the UFO event. So the police didn't show up the night before. They take a look and say, there's nothing to it. That must be rabbits burrowing or hens nesting or something of that nature. And they pack up and they all go. Now later that night, as you heard earlier, which is correct, Lori Burrowan, Airman Burrowan, was at the East Gate. She was stationed at the East Gate. She saw something. Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, who was the on-duty senior police officer, did go into the forest. Something happened. She had some kind of a confrontation. I wasn't aware of it at the time. It was kept very hush-hush, extremely hush-hush. She was air-evac'd out a day or 2 later. We do know that she got on the radio and had some kind of a problem, screaming for Bobby Ball for help. Now where he was and what he did, I don't know, and he would never talk about it. But we know something happened the second night. But I didn't find that out until 4 or 5 years later, when people started talking, and some of the cops started retiring or separating from the service. Well, let's go to the third night. We decided in the combat support group that we would have a year-end get-together for all officers and their significant others at the end of the year to kind of give people a pat on the back and to tell them, hey, you did a good job, and to recognize things and just to raise morale a little bit. We were really late getting our reservations in for the Woodbridge Officers Club, so we settled on the Woody Bar at Woodbridge. Well, the Woody Bar at Woodbridge is a big Quonset hut. Just one big open building with a brick fireplace in one end, small set of bathrooms on one side, and a small coat room. That's it. It's sort of a self-catering place if you had a party. So what we decided to do is to have a covered-ish dinner, and then we'd buy a couple hams and some turkey and rolls and some different things. So all 42 of us were gathered in there with the exception of one officer, the cop that was on duty, Lieutenant Bruce England. Well, we just finished the main course and we're getting ready for dessert when Bruce England came barging in. He was white as a sheet. And Bruce England was not a typical cop. Bruce England had been in the Marine Corps for 4 years, got out, went to school, got commissioned, came in the Air Force. He was pretty much a hardened lieutenant, if you know what I mean. He was very senior he was not a typical lieutenant. He said, I got to talk to you and the base commander right now, it's important. He said, what is it? He said, we got to talk privately. So he went into the coat room and he said, it's back. I said, what's back? He said, the UFO's back. Well, I got a little bit irritated right then. I said, what do you mean the UFO's back? He said, well, we went out and we found the lights in. He said, you were off the base? Yes, we did go off the base, but we thought there was something in the forest. No, I'm getting concerned. So Conrad and I talked, and he had to make the presentations and give a speech or two, so he said, well, go put this thing to rest. So I went to the chief of police, it was Mel Zickler, and I said, who's your senior NCO on duty tonight? He said, Bobby Ball, of all people, the same guy who'd been on the previous, Master Sergeant Ball. I knew him well, very competent individual. I said, have him come by the house and pick me up in about 30 or 40 minutes. Keep in mind, we were on Woodbridge and I lived on Bentwaters. And I was wearing a suit. I wasn't going to go out in the forest in a suit. I went to the disaster preparedness officer, Captain Sue Jones, and said, who's your standby person? She said, Monroe Nevels. Well, I knew Nevels. Nevels was very technically competent, but he was a little bit, how shall I say, he didn't use good judgment quite often, but I knew I could control him, so I said, have him come by the disaster preparedness office and pick us up. We'll pick him up in about 45 minutes. Have him bring his camera. I knew he had a good camera. He'd worked part-time as a volunteer filling in at the photo lab, and it's also working for the base newspaper when they needed someone to augment their staff. I went home and changed clothes, put on my utility uniform. By the way, if you ever go to Roswell, go to the UFO Museum. My uniform I wore in the forest that night's in a glass case down there. I donated it all to them. I changed clothes. They came by in a Jeep and picked me up. Bruce England, Bobby Ball, and another cop was in the back, which I later learned was Adrian Costanza. We went down to the disaster preparedness office. Neville showed up a little later. We had to wait for him because his wife was at a chapel program and he was babysitting. He came down and I said, take a Geiger counter along, just prove it so there's nothing out there. So we all piled into the Jeep, and Bruce England immediately says, hey, we're almost out of gas. So we went to the motor pool, and when we get to the motor pool, lo and behold, there's two cops there with a pickup truck pulling a light on, a motor generator with big fluorescent lights on it. So I said to him, what's going on? He said, this guy won't move. The fuels operator says, he keeps trying to tell me to put gas in it, won't work. I had it out in the forest and it wouldn't run. It's out of gas. And the kid at the fuels pump says, I'm telling you, it's overflowing. I filled it. They're arguing. I said, pack it in and move on. Give us some gas and let's get out of here. So we get the gas and we go across the base. We go out the east gate, down this Forest Service Road, into the forest. And lo and behold, there's at least 3 cop four-wheel drive vehicles pulling light-alls and about 10 or 15 cops out there. I about panicked. I'm thinking, this is a public relations disaster. If we get caught out in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the night in the holiday season with all this stuff out here, we'll never live it on. It'll make the front page of the local paper. So I tell the cops there, you guys be real quiet still. Bruce England says, let me show you where the craft supposedly landed 2 nights before. Okay, so we go into the forest. He showed me this spot. You saw John Steger's picture earlier. That was similar to what it looked like. They showed me 3 indentations equal distance apart. We get the Geiger counter out, and we take readings. The readings are highest in the center of the triangle formed by the 3 indentations, and each of the indentations are higher than the background radiation in the surrounding area. So I have them check the trees. These are tall Corsica pines with a tall canopy. You could see right through them. The side of the trees facing the 3 indentations gives a much higher reading than the backside of the tree. And we notice rub marks on the trees. There's blaze marks and there's rub marks that are bleeding a lot of sap. When we look up, we can see the canopy in the trees is broken and there's branches on the ground. And I'm thinking, wow, something has come down here. This certainly is. And we get the radiation readings, it's starting to trouble me. And while we're milling around, talking on the radio, and I've carried my little cassette recorder with me, I carried it everywhere I went. I make some recordings. And about that time, Bruce England says, look out there in the field. There's a glowing object out there. And we look out in the field, and there's a glowing object about the size of a large basketball or beach ball. It's not completely round, it's more oval. It has a dark center, and it appears like it's winking or something, sort of like blinking a little bit. And it's shedding something, like molten metal or sparks are coming off it. And I'm thinking to myself, I've seen a ball of lightning. I've never seen it before, but I've certainly heard about it. We watch it for a couple minutes, and the object comes toward us. It comes into the forest. It moves through the trees horizontally in front of us, avoiding the trees. And I'm thinking, this thing's under intelligent control. Wow, let's try and get closer to it. So we try and move up closer to it, and it recedes back out into the farmer's field. We move up to the fence line, which is an old rusty barbed wire fence, and watch it for a couple of minutes. And I can see the glow in the farmhouse. There's a farmhouse directly across from us with 2 rows of windows, the top floor and bottom floor. And it looks like the house is on fire. It's reflecting the light so brightly. That's how bright it is. In the meantime, we can see the lighthouse off to the right in the gap in the forest, in the tree line in the forest. I'm thinking the people in that house, I wouldn't want to be in there because it's only about 100 feet from the house. Then suddenly it silently explodes into 5 white objects like fireworks, just, and they disappear. So I said, let's go out in the field and see if we can find any evidence because something was coming off this object. So we climb over the rusty barbed wire fence and go out into the field. And the only thing we find out in the field is that the cattle had been there because we stepped in cow pies. We find no evidence whatsoever of anything else. So I said, let's move a little further out, see if we can get a little better view of things. And then Neville's, I think, says, look up to the sky on the left, up into the north. There's multicolored objects up there in the sky moving together in synchronization, like they're flying in a formation. I said, this is weird. Nobody's ever going to believe this. Why did they ever get involved in this? We watched them for several minutes, and they first appeared elliptical, and then they turned full round circles. About that time, somebody said, look to the south. There's 2 bright white lights, very bright, 2 objects that are very bright. Now, keep in mind, this is cold, clear winter night. It's about 30 degrees, 30, 32 degrees. There's a breeze wind, but the sky is clear as can be. We watch these objects to the south, and suddenly one comes overhead at very high speed. I mean, it was out over the coast. It comes up a couple thousand miles an hour. It stops directly overhead and sends down a beam, like a laser beam, and it lands right there at our feet. It's about 10 inches in diameter, and it's a very strong beam. It's so bright and strong that you can see dust particles in it. I'm thinking, is this a warning? Is this communication? Or is this some kind of a is it a weapon? Just as suddenly it appeared, click, it disappeared. The object then moved back to the south, and both objects moved to the east. Now, we could not discern a shape. The objects were so bright you could not see a shape. They moved over Bentwater's base, and they were sending down beams over there. Now, we had 3 different radio frequencies with it. I was on the command net, and I was calling the command post continuously. When we saw the objects in the sky, I called them and said, call the radar people, have them look here, have them look there, tell me what they see. And they all kept telling me, nobody sees anything. Later learned out, not true. Was not true. In the meantime, we hear the chatter on the police radio. There's a law enforcement net and a security net. And we can hear the chatter on the security net that the guys in the weapons storage area were seeing things. They were seeing things in the sky. There's also a CAM man, communications man, working in the control tower at the weapons storage area on the sensors. He sees it. He reports the UFO to his boss. Several of the cops went up in the control tower at the weapons storage area, and he got a pair of 12-power binoculars, and they were passing them around. And they claimed that the bright objects we see in the sky were actually triangular. And several of them saw what they claimed to be a large mothership. Now, I don't have time to read all the statements, but I have statements from all those people. Later, I learned out that at least 4 or 5 different groups of British civilians in different places surrounding the area of the base also saw the objects. The air traffic controllers in Bentwaters, I have their testimonies here. If we have time, I'll read them, but I've got some other stuff I want to cover with you. They saw the object go across their 60-mile scope in seconds. 8 seconds it went across the 60-mile scope. 60 miles is 120 miles because it's 60-mile radius. They saw the physical orange glowing object. They saw it go into the forest where we were. The 2 cops left at the gate to guard the base, or to guard the weapons. They saw the glowing object. Interesting story here. I didn't know who the second one was. I did find one through contacts. My adult daughter, who was with me at Bentwaters as a dependent, was in an outdoor store in Manassas, Virginia, buying camping gear, and she asked if they gave a military discount. And the clerk said yes, but the store manager was standing nearby. The store manager said, "Were you in the military?" She said, "Yes, I was in the Army, and I was in the Army band. But my dad was in the Air Force." And he said, "Well, I was in the Air Force." She said, "Where were you stationed?" He said, "Well, my first base was RAF Bentwaters." She said, "Bentwaters, my dad was at Bentwaters." She said, "When were you there?" He said, 1979 to 1981. He said to her, "What's your dad's name?" She said, "Halt." "Oh, Colonel Halt." She said, "I was one of the guys that guarded the weapons at the gate the night he went into the forest." Can you believe it's a small world? Unbelievable number of people. I sat down and tallied up approximately 75 or more people at least 15 to 18 locations saw the object in the sky. Unbelievable, isn't it? Well, let me walk through the slides and talk about some other things, because I want to give you an update on some things that have happened lately and things that are going on. But my biggest concern, and the only reason I'm here today, and I speak out from time to time and wrote the book, is to get the truth out there. There is so much nonsense out there, you can't believe it. Let me give you a couple examples. Don't bother buying this book. It's not worth it. It's a whole lot of nonsense. The weaponization of unidentified aerial phenomena, the Rendlesham forest incident, and the explanation. Here's an even better one. Nick Renfrew, whoever knows, you know him. The Rendlesham Forest UFO conspiracy. They claim there was a mind control experiment, that there were holographs put up. Now, in order to put a holograph up, you're going to have a power source. Go back to 1980. We didn't have lithium batteries. You certainly couldn't run an extension cord out there. You'd have to have a generator or a huge battery pack. For 3 nights, 75 different people at 15 different locations. How are you going to do that? Think about it. Do you think we would allow holographs or weaponization, or what do you want to call it, mind control experiments to be done on people guarding our most closely guarded weapons? People that are armed with weapons, automatic weapons, with authorized shoot to kill. They're authorized to use deadly force. Do you think we're going to allow that to happen to air traffic controllers on duty? No way. People are just going crazy on this thing. I would talk about the book Left at the Escape. Please don't even get me started on that. That's been disproven so bad, and Larry Warren was such a fraud that it's just unbelievable. I was very disappointed. Peter Robbins, who really wrote the book, was supposed to come here today. I was going to let him talk to you, but he didn't show up. Well, let me put the slides on. Go ahead. That's just a press release. Go, let's get through the next one. That's the first book we did. The only reason I did another book is because there's been a lot of stuff updating. Go ahead. Go ahead. These are just some pictures of the base to give you an idea. This is an interesting story goes with this. This is News of the World, the equivalent of National Enquirer. It's out of business now. They got sued out of business. They came to the base to get the story. I got a call from the gate guard and said, Keith Beebe from the News of the World is here. He wants your biography and he wants to talk to you. I said, there's no way is he going to get my biography, my picture. So I went to the public affairs office and pulled my file. He came in, I did talk to him briefly, and he made me an offer, you can't believe, $40,000 to $50,000, which I couldn't accept, unfortunately. He went to the public affairs office to get my picture, and he couldn't find it, so he took the wing commander and my big boss's picture, put my big boss's picture in the paper. And I finally explained to him years later what happened. There's another shot of the paper. That's the air traffic control tower at Bentwaters. Still World War II vintage, still there. That's the air traffic control tower at Woodbridge Base. That's looking out the east gate at Woodbridge Base. That's the gate itself. There's a guard shack back there. That guard shack's a new guard shack. The old guard shack was about 3 foot by 3 foot, and the only thing it had was a little stool in it and a telephone. Go ahead. That's looking down the East Gate Road now. Now in 1980, this was all open field. This is grown up now. You can see almost to the coast from there. Go ahead. That's Jim Pennis and I on the road. That's looking back at the East Gate. Go ahead. That's the Forest Service Road now going down into the forest. Go ahead. That's just a plaque that's up there now that the Forest Service has put up. Go ahead. Go ahead. This is the area where the police vehicles were parked when we went into the forest. This is down in the forest. And the site where the object landed is on the right-hand side, down in about 150 yards. Go ahead. This is somewhat what the forest floor looked like then. This was taken about 3 or 4 years ago. This is the plaster cast that I have a copy of. What happened when Jim made the cast, he put his name on the back, he dated them and numbered them, 1, 2, 3. His 2 have disappeared. One disappeared from his hold baggage. His hold baggage, he had it in a box, labeled and sealed, inside a large box, inside a sealed crate that was caulked and nailed shut. When he opened the crate, guess what? The plaster cast was gone. Interesting. This is the weapons storage area. And you can see the tower in the background. That's where the guys went up in the tower with binoculars and they could see the object very clearly and claimed it was triangular. Go ahead. Another shot of the tower. This gives you an idea of the fence around the weapons storage area. 8 or 9 foot tall, double chain link fence, concertina wire, or razor tape wire on the top. Sensors in the field, sensors on the fence. Pretty impregnable. The only way to get in there was to come in by air or with a ramming vehicle. And we had provisions to handle that. All right, let's take a look at this now. This is RAF Bentwaters. This is Woodbridge. Here's the East Gate here, East Gate Road. We came out here, down here, down here. There's where the object was sitting, supposedly. The farmer's house is there. The object was in the field there. The lighthouse is over here. I'll show you another picture in a minute. Go ahead. That's just another picture. This is the weapons storage area. It's kind of run down now. Nobody's maintained it for the last so many years. I took this last year or the year before. We'll go back one. This is the alert fire team facility. It's actually a bunker, and that's a garage door with an armored vehicle. Interesting story, one of the maintenance technicians accidentally fired a round from the A-10 aircraft on the flight line. The round, fortunately, was a target practice round, which did not have depleted uranium in it. But it went across the flight line, and multiple people saw it and heard it go by. It went through the fence, it went into the weapons storage area, and hit the garage door on the alert fire team facility. Of course, they thought they were under attack when it hit the door, because it turned and knocked the door off. They sounded the alarm, and there was a great deal of explanation that had to be done, cleared to the Pentagon. All right, now here's where we stood in the field, back here. The lighthouse is over there, the farmer's house is there. Here's where the object was in the field, to give you some idea. Now that was just an open field with cattle in it. One thing I failed to mention earlier is that when we saw the glowing objects in the field, all the barnyard animals went berserk. And when the object silently exploded, they then got quiet. Interesting. That's just another shot. Again, farmhouse, lighthouse there, object out here in the field. There's the infamous lighthouse. I met the lighthouse keeper several years back, he and his wife, Keith, and his wife, Marcella. He explained to me, he said, the lighthouse has 3 lenses, a white and clear lens, a red and a green lens. If you saw a red light, you could not have seen it from land. The red light shines to sea and the green light shines to see. Their navigational lights. The only light you can see from the land is white. So if you saw a red light, you didn't see the lighthouse. This is the island. This is the island, Orford Ness. Now this is an interesting place. This was a highly classified place for many, many years. This is where the British developed their nuclear triggers and did a lot of experimental work on highly classified stuff. It was strictly off base for years and years and years. It was a site for a special listening post called Cobra Mist, but all of that was removed in 1977, which is 3 years before the incident we had at Bentwaters. Now keep in mind, 3 years. 3 years it was turned into a nature sanctuary for birds, etc., etc. The only thing out there now active, the lighthouse is gone, they took it down, but BBC has 3 radio towers because it's a good location for radio transmission. And if someone's really interested, this is the history of Orford Ness. It goes into great detail about everything that happened out there that they can publicly admit. This is the castle, R.F. Bodsey. Now the whole area is fraught with interesting things. Bodsey was where the original radar sites were set up in World War II, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of them. They later became a bird shooter place, in other words, air defense missiles. Here's some of the towers. You can see they're pretty good size. This is also the history of Bodsey. I bought these books there out of print now, but I do have copies of them. Go ahead. Just to the north of the base is Sizewell B, nuclear power plant. They claim that they have as many as 30 sightings a month there. Interesting place. There's a whole lot of, how should I say, strange things around the base. This is an old shot of Butley Village. Butley Village is the British home of witchcraft. Now, can you see this? World War II radars, witchcraft, nuclear power plant, our activity at the base. It may be that's the attractions or whatever it is, but there's something about that area. I've got statements from people that go back as far as 15 years up till today. There are all kinds of strange happenings, strange things, strange animals, strange monk-like creatures, big, large cats, wolf-like animals, you name it, orbs. Go ahead. This is a daytime shot now of Butley Village. When we give the briefing to the new airmen at Bentwaters, well, we used to before we closed the base, we tell them stay away from this little town. It's not a good place for Americans to go. That's a copy of my memo. There's an interesting story behind that. The memo was never supposed to go anywhere. The memo was written for Don Moreland. When I came back from the incident, I went home and changed clothes. I couldn't sleep. It was 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I think I had a bite to eat. Decided to go into the office. It was Sunday morning. Now the office was a big Quonset hut. It had two sections, a foyer in the center, and a wing commander on one side and a base commander on the other side. So as I went up the front steps into the foyer, the wing commander drove up in a staff car. So I stayed on the steps to open the door for him, and he got out and came up and he said, "Chuck, that was some night you had last night." He never turned his radio off. He heard all my radio transmissions. I said, "Sure was." I said, "I made a tape." He said, "What?" "Let me hear it." I said, "Okay." So he went in his office and sat down and I played the tape for him. He said, "Wow." He said, "Let me have it." I said, "What are you going to do with it?" He said, "Well, we have a staff meeting. The general has a staff meeting every Wednesday morning at Milton Hall. I'm going to take the tape and play it for the general." I said, "Oh crap, there's my career down the tubes." So that was Sunday. I worried all week. When he came back Monday afternoon, I was waiting at the door when he came in. And I remember exactly what I said. I said, "Boss, do I still have a job?" He laughed and threw me the tape recorder. He said, "Come on in the office." So I went in the office. I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "The general knew something about it. He knew a bit about it." Interesting. He said, "Describe it." So Williams told him what he knew from my telling him. He said, "Play the tape." So he played the tape for the general and the staff. Everybody quietly listened, and the general said, "Well, what do we do?" Nobody said anything. So the general, in his infinite wisdom, said, "Well, it happened off the base. It's a British affair. Case closed." Whew. So I said to Williams, "Well, what does that mean for me?" He said, "You can forget about it." I said, "Great. Do I need to do anything?" "Yeah." When Don Moreland, who was a liaison officer from the RAF, gets back, he was on holiday on Wales for the Christmas. He was there for Christmas. When he gets back, get with him, see what he wants to do. Okay, sounds good to me. So Moreland came back about 2 weeks later. Hence the date of my memo was almost 2 weeks later. I told him what happened, and he about went panic. Oh. He made some phone calls. He said, "Give me something to talk from." So I wrote the memo strictly for him to use to talk from. It was never meant to go anywhere or even see the light of day. Well, you know what happened. It got out. Interesting story goes with that. It was typed on a select typewriter. We hadn't gone to word processors yet. The only thing we had in the office was the carbon manifold or the carbon paper. Years later, when I wanted a copy, I had to go on the internet to get a copy. That's true. Good old internet. Funny thing happened, or an interesting thing happened. I read it, gave it to Conrad, he read it, he took it down to the other end of the building to show it to Williams. Well, Williams says now he'd never seen it. Well, he's passed away, but he said he'd never seen it. Nonsense. I found out recently talking to Dr. Kit Green, some of you know who he is. He was a former CIA advisor for UFO matters to the White House and deeply involved in all kinds of things, and known as the fix-it doctor for UFO events. He tells me, he's told me this recently, he had a copy of my memo on his desk the day after it was written. How about that, sports fans? Small world, isn't it? Here's where I hope Peter Robbins showed up. This is the kind of stuff he put on the internet about me. That's me, Nick Pope, and Peniston. Go ahead. That's me in jail. They posted this stuff on the internet. That's Larry Warren and one of his buddies. This is very interesting. All the Air Force histories, every Air Force unit is required to have a historian and do a history, and it all goes to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. So I went to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama and asked for a copy of our from Bentwaters history from November, December, January, February, 1980. Guess what? It's classified secret. I can't see it. What can I do? What can I say? Even though when I retired, I had clearance way beyond top secret, but that doesn't matter now. Go ahead. This is to give you an idea what the Forest Service roads look like. This is why people say they drove a vehicle down there. There's no way they could have taken a vehicle down there unless it was high-centered four-wheel drive. J.D. Ingalls was probably the original whistleblower. J.D. Ingalls was a cop that worked in what we call the back office. He was on the staff. He was, how should I say, he frequented the local pubs quite frequently, and he became very friends with some of the musicians. One of the musicians had a girlfriend by the name of Brenda Butler. Brenda Butler, Dot Street, and Jenny Reynolds wrote the book, Left at the East Gate. J.D. Ingalls got friendly with them, and J.D. Ingalls was used by the spooks to put out disinformation. And he fed them a whole lot of nonsense, and he also got involved with Peniston. We'll talk a little more about that if we have enough time. Anyhow, recently he was asked some questions. Is Rendlesham Forest fact or fiction? Fact. Was Colonel Halt involved? Yes, he was on scene. His story is true. Was Larry Warren involved? Never heard of Larry Warren. Was Burroughs and Peniston involved? They were, he says. Were nukes involved? Well, he doesn't talk about that. He said there's no cover-up at all. Colonel Halt's original story as outlined in his letter happened. Other legends grew out of that incident or just that. The original things that happened were strange enough in my opinion. That was done recently, last year. Go ahead. Gary Baker was an air traffic controller at Neatishead. That's the air defense folks in England. I'll go back and let me finish that. They admitted that they saw a bogey, as they called it, and they dropped off. They came in from the sea and dropped off into the forest. And here's what happened. Can you all read that? The radar tapes were removed from RS Neatishead along with the ops room bridge logs pertaining to the event. I was in the briefing room at Neatishead when the high-ranking officers and men in suits both told ops squadron staff it didn't happen and not to talk about it. But the MOD continued to deny evidence citing Neatishead radar camera was switched off at the time, which is rubbish. There were 2 radars there and both had cameras. If the cameras were switched off, why did they need to remove the tapes and the bridge logs and brief the squadrons not to talk about it? Interesting, isn't it? Go ahead. This is, I was talking about Dr. Chris Green. This is Peter Robbins' withdrawal from things after he found out and finally realized that Larry Warren was a fraud. Go ahead. These are some of the paintings. Everybody here knows Bud Hopkins or knows of him. These are some paintings that Larry Warren did. The original is on the left and Larry Warren's is on the right. He's quite a character. He did several paintings he was going to sell to it. He got found out. Go ahead. There's another one he did. Go ahead. Gordon Williams. Gordon Williams knew a whole lot more about the incident than he ever told me. I was very naive and very trusting when OSI told me they weren't interested. I learned they weren't. He told me he didn't know much about it. He did, but he was under orders. Now, he was an interesting person, brilliant, one of the best people I'd ever worked for. He was being groomed as a potential for Chief of Staff of the Air Force. He had 2 4-star sponsors, which is phenomenal. In fact, he made 2 stars and was on the list for 3 stars when he came down with encephalitis and had serious medical problems and had to retire. But a little bit about him. This is some emails from his daughter. On his deathbed, he decided to talk. He wanted to talk to me and he wanted to talk to James Fox. Most of you know who James Fox is, the movie producer. And he told them his involvement. So they contacted me, or actually I contacted them. Just leave that alone. I contacted them and I had a meeting with them. And the daughter was so nervous, I thought she was going to jump over the table. She had several drinks, and this was noon on Sunday. The son said, I'll talk to you if you sign a release. So he pulled out a 5-page release. I read it and very reluctantly signed it. And he told me 2 words, which were words of encouragement. I said, well, tell me the rest of it. He said, that's all there is. I knew better than that. Well, what can I do? I badgered him, did everything I could. I was contacted about that time by a scriptwriter in Hollywood that's working on a script. And I told her, why don't you call him and see what happens? So she called him. And he said, yep, I can tell you the story, but it'll cost you $10,000. $10,000. So anybody has $10,000, maybe we can find out when her dad said on the deathbed, but I'm sure not going to cough up $10,000 to find out. I'd love to know. Here's an interesting thing I learned here a few years ago. The military priority system on the telephones. Now in 1980, we had a switchboard, the old-fashioned pull up the cord and plug it in type thing, and we had 3 or 4 operators all the time. I mean, we were still back in the dark ages, believe me. All our calls went down the road to Rendlesham Heath, which was a super secret comm center, but they did relay all our calls to anywhere we needed to go. That's where the base was tied into. We had 13 lines. The system that worked, now go back, normally used a routine call. Something really important, you could bump it up the priority. Only one time in my whole career as base commander twice and in DODIG, I only used anything above priority one time. And that was the Secretary of Defense called me personally and said, call me back now immediately with the answer. Other than that, I never went above a priority call. I mean, I was sitting in the office one day and the secretary came in and said, Mr. Casper Weinberger's on the phone, he wants to talk to you. I said, oh yeah, she'll tell me more. She said, no, I'm serious. His secretary says he wants you on the line now. So I picked up the phone and the lady said on the other end, hold for Mr. Weinberger. And he came on the line and wanted an answer to something now. I said, it'll take me a few minutes. He said, call me back immediately, which I did. That is the only time I ever used a call above immediate or above priority. And the other two, flash and flash override. According to the comm center director, right after the incident, the military phone system was so clogged with flash calls that routine and priority calls couldn't get through for 3 days. Now, what was going on, folks? Tell me. This gets really interesting. Okay, here's the east gate here. Right here. Here's the farmer's house. Here is the site where I had been taken, where the plaster casts were made. Now I know I was at the right site. The reason I know that, I took soil samples, put them in a little film cassette carrier, the old 35mm black cassettes Kodak made, and had them analyzed. And the analyst came back and said, I know how you fake this. There's calcium carbonate in there. I said, thank you. That tells me I got the right place. That's from the plaster of Paris. So this was the site that everybody went to initially for years. Now, we did a program several years ago. Jim Pennison and I were there. It's on the YouTube. Invasion at Rendlesham. Go look it up. You can watch it for yourself. The producer takes us up to the gate. The guy from Cosner and Muir, I think. He takes some filming here and he said, well, let's go to the landing site. Jim says, it's down here. I said, what do you mean? He takes us down this path, and right here, in this area, approximately here, says, this is where it was. I said, Jim, this isn't where the plaster casts were made. This isn't where the police came to. This isn't where I've been going to. This isn't where you've taken me 2 or 3 times before, and John Burroughs has taken me to. I said, how do you know? He said, well, there must be 2 sites. What do you mean 2 sites? This doesn't make sense. He says, see these trees? These trees were here. I remember because of the trees. Well, what they'd done, the production people had brought the forester, the original forester, Vince Thurkettle, back to be involved in the filming. Vince looks at the trees and says to Jim, Jim, these trees aren't 20 years old. Guess what? This was 20 years later. Those trees wouldn't even been saplings hardly in those days. So, now if you read the book, Rendlesham Enigma, they have the landing site down here. What's going on? Now we have 3 landing sites. The Forest Service says this is the landing site. Gosh, it gets confusing. I can tell you for a fact, I know this is the right place. There's a big oak tree here that was there in 1980, and it's still there, a big old gnarly oak tree that's probably a couple hundred years old. Now, how we get all those other sites, I don't know. What I did learn before I debriefed all the people involved. I'll go to the next one. This is a look at Jim's notebook. And this is quite interesting. See the date in there, 27 December? The original night was the night of the 25th, the morning of the 26th. His notebook says the 27th. Now, the notebook appeared after, it first appeared years later, after my memo came out. My memo was released to the public in the summer of July 1983. It had the date of the 27th. The 27th is the date I went out to the forest. My experience was actually on the 28th, because it started after midnight. So his date is wrong. So I said, how come you have the wrong date in your memo, Jim? He said, oh, that must have been a flight exercise. I said, wait a minute. After you came back on the 26th, you went on a 3-day break. You weren't even on the base on the 27th. Well, that must be when I wrote the memo, or the code. I said, no, that 27th, you said you wrote the code with your wife watching you at the kitchen table on the 26th. Let's get the date right. Remember I said earlier, Aaron Bertolino said there was nothing, no writing in the book. Interesting. Go look at the YouTube, you can see the video. Go ahead. That's Aaron Bertolino. Go ahead. Now, Jim gets on the phone, he calls Brenda Butler, October 1983. He says to Brenda Butler, who does not know him, this is Jim, but he doesn't say Jim Peniston, he uses a fake name. This is James Archer. I want to tell you about the UFO event. What happened was apparently J.D. Ingalls told him that the girls were writing the book, so he's going to set him straight. So he said, I'll tell you what really happened in the forest if you want to meet me. So they agree to meet outside the base on what they call a lay-by, in other words, a pull-off on the side of the road that runs between the two bases. So they meet, and he never tells us her real name. And he tells her, and I have her original notes, he tells her what happened. He said, we went into the forest, we saw the craft, it was definitely a mechanical craft. Every time we tried to get near it, it moved away from us. So everywhere I turned, nobody got near a craft, nobody touched a craft, nobody got any code. The code didn't come out until many, many years later. There's more. Go ahead. The notebook, first mentioned in 1997 to Sally Rail. Sally Rail was a feature writer for what was then Omni magazine. First appeared in the public in the 203 filming Invasion at Rendlesham. There was no code or missing pages. Well, I asked about it. When I saw the code then, or the book then, I said, well, where's the code in it? He said, oh, I took the code out of the book. Well, I see a picture they're in, and well, I put it back in then. What? What's going on here? The symbols. Symbols look almost identical to what Jesse Marcel reported his dad showed him when he brought the stuff back at Roswell. Sure looks like a copy. His drawings had the craft as both rectangular and rectangular. And Burrow says he never saw the notebook on the site. Here we have Tracy Farley. Tracy Farley became Jim's girlfriend. You can read, she met him and she helped him write code, helped him debrief code, helped him try and put it into some kind of a scrambler or something they were doing. They had fallen out though. So the story really gets muddy. Go ahead. Jim's wife, Maria, when contacted, she said, Jim said he wrote it at the kitchen table the next morning. She said, he never wrote any code. I never saw him write any code. She said, all he ever cared about was money. Of course, now this is a scorned woman. They've been divorced, so I can take that with a grain of salt. Go ahead. Here's an interesting movie that talks about aliens and all. In short, a lot of Jim's comments he talks about in the future sure sound like they came right out of the movie. Go ahead, we're running out of time. This is General Williams. He went back to England, and Georgina Bruni was writing the book You Can't Tell the People, and she was bugging him, so he stopped in London and spent a day or two with her. And he brought her a ball cap that said, The truth is out there, and he had him put on the back. Bentwater's 1980. And he told her there are more things in the universe than we ever know about. And I'm very open to the possibility that an advanced civilization could have amazing technology. He also admitted to me that a cleanup crew arrived at Bentwater Woodbridge right after the event. I remember a strange C-5 without markings landed at Woodbridge, which is very unusual because they always landed at Bentwater because we had better parking spaces. If they landed at Woodbridge, we didn't have a real good place to accommodate them. They stayed at the end of the runway, no markings on the plane. The crew all had white coveralls, no Air Force uniforms. Interesting. They provided their own security. Now, even when the U-2s landed and the SR-71s landed, we provided security with our cops. They wouldn't let our cops get near the plane. I thought it was Department of Energy people who were doing, what should I say, unannounced inspection. That kind of didn't put the two and two together. But years later, I realized they were probably doing something. Williams claims that the crew came in and sanitized the area in the forest. I don't know what that means. The co-author of the book, actually that wrote the book, Rendlesham, Enigma, his wife Elizabeth, very active on Facebook. She put a posting up there about 3 pages long. It was not very complimentary to everybody. Puffed her husband up a bit. But she made a comment in there that they were going to destroy all the Rendlesham Forest witnesses. Interesting to put that in post. Okay, that pretty much sums up. I have a whole lot more I can go over, but I've summarized things as best I could to give you a clear understanding. There is so much nonsense out there, it's unbelievable. But I tell you, one thing is true. We are not alone, I guarantee you that. Now, if anybody wants to stay for a few minutes, I'll answer questions.